Howdy my totally as always tubular gamers, and we're back with another ranking video, and today we're going to be talking about SpongeBob. See, you know SpongeBob, your mom, your dog, your grandma, your sister, your brother, your uncle, your aunt, they all know SpongeBob. He's one of the most iconic characters in all of media, and his show's one of the most iconic shows of pop culture. So naturally, SpongeBob's had a bunch of video games. The series was really ready for video games since day one, and here we are with dozens of SpongeBob games now. Now, over the years, there's been a lot of really good and some really bad SpongeBob games, but I think a majority of people who have played SpongeBob games can agree that the best SpongeBob games are 3D platformers. Games where you're playing as SpongeBob in a big 3D open environment, usually collecting stuff. These are what are considered to be the very best of the SpongeBob video games. At least I would believe so. I personally think the best SpongeBob games are the 3D platformers. It all started way back on the early days of the PS2 with Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, and then really we just went from there. There was a couple on the PS2 era, there was a couple on the 360 era, and then finally we have one for the PS4, a new SpongeBob 3D platformer, SpongeBob the Cosmic Shake, which I got to play early, thanks to THQ Nordic, so I'm going to give them a big shout out right here. Thank you so much for sending me a review code, sending it to me early, letting me play the game. Definitely a dream to play a new SpongeBob game early and getting a review code, so thank you very much. That's pretty cool. And so, to celebrate a new SpongeBob 3D platform, I thought, why not rank every SpongeBob 3D platform? I played them all. I played a number of them, actually, like when they came out. Let's rank them worst to best. Let's look at all of them. Let's really see what the best 3D platformer SpongeBob games are. I'm also only going to be looking at the home console games. I think the Atlantis game on DS is like a 3D platformer, but we're not including that. We're looking at just the home console games, the games you and I actually care about. And so you know how it goes. We're going to be ranking these games based on how well they've aged, how they play, are they easy to pick up and play, are they super clunky and not fun, just the usuals, like, share, comment, sub. Let's just get right into it. What do I think is the weakest, the worst of the SpongeBob 3D platformers? And so here we have SpongeBob Planktons Robotic Revenge, published by Activision and released for all the consoles at the time in 2013. This was definitely during the dark era of SpongeBob games where they were an exception to the norm and they were actually great licensed games to being the norm and being garbage licensed games. And I remember checking this game out, like when it came out, going, ooh, a new SpongeBob 3D platformer, how is it? And just being immediately disappointed and was just like, wow, this game blows. And you know what? 10 years later, yeah, this game is not good. This is a boring, bland, basic 3D platformer with the most basic of platforming elements and a lot of just kind of beat 'em up combat and shooting gameplay. Like, I was floored really with how bad this was. The plot is, as the title implies, it's about Plankton and his robots rising up to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula, and it's up to SpongeBob and friends to stop him. The game actually is fully playable with up to 4 players, and I never got anybody to play this game with me. Maybe it's more fun in multiplayer, but by yourself it is a very shallow, again, very basic game. It is just soul-crushingly generic and uninspired. It's maybe 2.5 or 3 hours long, and it honestly gets repetitive in that time frame too. They just have you do the same thing where you just beat up a basic enemy, shoot an enemy, shoot a switch, and do, again, the most basic of platforming that you could do in a video game. Like, did they even try with this game? No. I was pretty much done with this game from the moment I picked it up. The presentation is pretty awful. It barely looks any better than Battle for Bikini Bottom, and it came out like 10 years later, which is just sad. And this was really just an incredibly boring game. It's not too often where I just completely tear a game a new asshole, but this game deserves it. Like, it is just junk. This game is not worth playing. Nobody should play this game. Maybe someone who's like 5 or under could find some enjoyment with it. And I've seen some comments where they go, I have nostalgia for this, I played it as a kid. That's unfortunate. I think you should play just about any other SpongeBob game and you'll have a better time than this game. This game should not be played. And so here we have SpongeBob Hero Pants, developed by Behavior, published by Activision, and releasing in 2015 for 360, 3DS, and Vita. This game is based off of SpongeBob Sponge Out of Water, the second SpongeBob movie that was in theaters. And I actually thought this was a pretty decent movie. I didn't love it, but I thought that a majority of the movie was actually pretty good. This game, though, no, this game is not very good. This game was, if you couldn't tell, made by the people who made Planktons Robotic Revenge, and it plays incredibly similar to that game, aka bad. The game takes place sometime after the movie and sees another magical page, the last magical page, being used to cause destruction, and so Bubbles, the talking dolphin, tells them that they all need to team up to stop whoever's doing this. Okay, fine enough plot, whatever. The actual gameplay though, oh yeah, this is incredibly similar to Planktons' Robotic Revenge. It's another incredibly basic beat-em-up platformer that goes up to 4 players and is incredibly short, and it gets honestly repetitive in its short runtime. At least you get to be the super beefed up versions of these characters from the movie. I mean, I guess that makes it a little cooler than Robotic Revenge, but this is just another incredibly generic, bland, uninspired game that I just don't think like anybody should play. It just is so soulless. Like, it barely, again, feels like SpongeBob. Like, these environments, yeah, they're SpongeBob-ish. The SpongeBob characters are there, but it just doesn't feel like it has any soul to it. It feels like it was made for the sole purpose of just making a quick buck, and that's all the game feels like. It's just shovelware. There's a few collectibles here and there, but they just don't really mean anything outside of the ending cutscene. I remember the frame rate was a bit suspicious, and the game doesn't look good at all anyway, so it's like the frame rate sucks too. This was a 360 game releasing in 2015. Was like at the very end of the 360's lifespan. It should have looked and played a little better than this, but unfortunately no. What we have is frankly just a piece of junk. I don't recommend anybody play this game. It wouldn't even be a very good coaster. It's slightly better than Robotic Revenge because it's based off at least something pretty decent, the movie. But just like Robotic Revenge, I don't recommend this game to anybody. SpongeBob fans would not like it either. Just go watch the movie. It's a better use of your time, and stay away from this game. Like, just don't. And so here we have SpongeBob Truth or Square releasing in 2009. This was also developed by Heavy Iron Studios. This was to coincide with the episode of the same name, and I don't remember liking the episode too much. And so for this game to get its own video game and its own 3D platformer SpongeBob game, I was like, huh. I never tried this game until I was about to make this video, and coming back all these years later, yeah, this is nothing special at all. This feels really just kind of cobbled together, undercooked, and quite mediocre. The story sees SpongeBob going through a bunch of his memories to try to figure out where he put the Krabby Patty formula. I mean, it seems like a fine enough premise. You get to go through some of the old episodes, but these don't feel like the old episodes. Like, the beginning cutscene feels like the old episode, and then the level itself, even the location itself, is nothing at all to do with the episode. Like, it just feels like, again, it was just kind of slapped together and was like, yeah, remember this episode? It's this level now, and it's like, this has nothing to do with the level at all. And along the way, you platform and beat up enemies, more robots that are here for just some reason. It has to do with Plankton going into SpongeBob's memories, I guess. I'm not even totally sure. Anyway, yeah, it's a basic 3D platformer. This is more basic than really any of the other Heavy Iron Studios platformers. The level design is just really not there. I thought it was incredibly subpar, and it just didn't excite me or intrigue me or even keep me all that engaged. The combat is really the same story. You just kind of spam the same move over and over and over, maybe 2 moves, and that's really it. There's not even as much depth as there was in Battle for Bikini Bottom, which didn't have a lot to begin with anyway. There's just not really much variety here when it comes to the environments, enemies, platforming, or really anything. You collect a bunch of these happy tokens. SpongeBob wants to be happy, and this game just feels like incredibly rushed, and it just feels like they pushed it out the door immediately for this episode without even being done with the like planning phases, because it just reuses a bunch of stuff from the old SpongeBob games. Like, there's almost, if not any, original music in this game. It uses all the music from the movie game and Battle for Bikini Bottom, and I love that music, but it's just totally out of place here. The presentation is nothing special. This was a 360 game, and it looks not even like any better really than Battle for Bikini Bottom. And again, it just really didn't do anything to interest me. Like, I just felt nothing while I was playing this. It was underwhelming. The power-ups are nothing special at all. The level design's nothing special. The gameplay itself is just, it's not like broken, it's not awful, but it just doesn't do anything really good either. It's just kind of there, and it's not even fun. That's the biggest thing. It's just not even fun, and again, with the shoddy presentation and just weird music, no. This is just not worth playing at all. I finished it in maybe 2.5 hours also, so I was like, this isn't even a long game either. What a waste of $5, honestly, on Xbox Live. And yeah, no, it's not worth playing. It's not horrible, it's not broken, it's not terrible, but it's not good. It's just not good. And so here we have SpongeBob Creature from the Krusty Krab, releasing in 2006 for all the major consoles at the time. Now this game is really weird. It is a number of games put together basically. I always saw it as a kid, I even played it as a kid, but I didn't buy it until way later in life to see what the hype was all about, and really, yeah, it wasn't as good as I was hoping it would be. The game is about dreams. It's about SpongeBob, Patrick, and Plankton having dreams, and it's some really wacky times. SpongeBob's dream is that his bed turns into a hot rod, and so there's a bunch of races that need to be done, and some 3D platforming. Patrick's is that he's a superhero in a comic book world, and so it's a bit of a brawler, and also it looks all cel-shaded. Plankton's is a bit more interesting, where at first he's getting chased by a giant Krabby Patty in a 2D platformer, and then eventually he becomes giant and starts destroying everything, and then SpongeBob and Patrick have to take him out. The story of the game was fine enough. It is a bit weird, but it does have some nice throwbacks to older SpongeBob episodes, like when Plankton's huge, which I do like.
I see you, Zap. I see you, Zap.
In terms of playing this game though, yeah, it's definitely a genre mashup. There's a ton of different gameplay styles here, much more than just 3D platforming. In fact, I would say you're not 3D platforming a majority of this game, but there is 3D platforming here. When you are 3D platforming, it's just with SpongeBob really, and it's very basic. You beat up some enemies and go through some basic environments with some generally shallow puzzles. There's really just not all that much to it. But as SpongeBob, you also get to drive in the car, you get to race on your bed, and you know, this is fine enough. I think the racing gameplay is, again, pretty whatever. The car controls fine enough. When you're Patrick, it's the beat 'em up, and the beat 'em up stuff is actually pretty decently fun. It's pretty mindless, pretty simple, but I thought it was fun enough, and there's a little bit of platforming here. And when you're Plankton, that's probably when the game's at its best. The 2D platformer stuff, I think it's pretty decent for what it is. It doesn't go on too long. This game doesn't really go on too long, but when you're giant Plankton destroying everything, this was the most fun I had with the game. This is when I actually digged it, and I thought it was pretty fun. When you're SpongeBob trying to take Plankton out, it's pretty fine enough too, but this game doesn't do anything amazing. It doesn't do anything awful, but it just kind of is there. I would say it's a generally mediocre, average experience with some fun highlights, particularly when you're Plankton. When I was SpongeBob, I really just wanted to play all the SpongeBob games I grew up with, because I was like, those are way better than this game. This game just feels relatively undercooked. Despite having a decent amount of variety, I never felt like I could really sink my teeth into any of the gameplay styles, and the game is like about 4 hours, maybe 4.5 if you take your time, so there's not even all that much to the game. Should you try it? I mean, if you love SpongeBob, maybe, but otherwise you could just skip it. And so here we have SpongeBob Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, releasing in 2002 for the GameCube and PS2. This was pretty early in SpongeBob's life, like Season 3 wasn't even out yet. And I remember playing this game as a small child, but I didn't really play it until I came back to it many years later. And was I missing much? Not really, but this is still a fine enough little 3D platformer with SpongeBob attached to it. The story is pretty relaxed. It sees SpongeBob finding a treasure chest and opening it up and releasing the Flying Dutchman on accident, who exacts his revenge. The revenge for digging him up and freeing him. Jeez, what an asshole. But yeah, he kidnaps all of SpongeBob's friends, and so it's up to SpongeBob to go to a number of different locations and save his friends from the Dutchman. The plot is pretty simple. The game doesn't really have many throwbacks to the show, since the show was still relatively new, all things considered. But that's fine enough. The gameplay is, yeah, 3D platformer. Basically, you play exclusively as SpongeBob, and you get dropped into these rather large environments, and it's just a bit of a collect-a-thon. It's not to the level that like Banjo-Kazooie is. There's not that much to collect, and these levels aren't like super complex or anything. Most of them are relatively flat, and there's nothing all that exciting with the level design. It's way better than Robotic, Revenge, and Hero Pants, but it's nothing that won't blow your mind, and for the time it was a bit basic. But you do get these abilities at least. That mixes things up. SpongeBob gets a couple different abilities you can change in the tent. You can be like Jellyfish SpongeBob, where you can glide with the net, or Mermaid Man SpongeBob. And I think these add a little bit of variety to the game, and you know, despite everything, I still did have a fun time. It's a pretty relaxed, simple platformer, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. Sure, not all the tasks you get are the most exciting, but I think the game is still more than competent enough, and I think it does have some fun parts to it. It is pretty charming still all these years later. The presentation, it's okay. Some of the character models like Patrick just look freaking weird and cursed as hell, but I mean, it's fine enough. I'd say the best thing about this game is the music. The music actually surprisingly slaps. Like, it's actually pretty good. I still have it like in some of my playlists nowadays. It's so good. I also remember as a kid, at least on PS2, the load times were pretty awful, and I don't really know why. All in all, this is a fine little game. Again, it's not going to blow your mind. I would say it's just slightly above average, but it is still a good game. It does have some charm, and it at least respects the SpongeBob license. And I think that if you're an old school SpongeBob fan, maybe you should check this one out. Look, it's not Battle for Bikini Bottom. It's just not. But it is still a fine little game. And so here we have the SpongeBob SquarePants movie game, developed by Heavy Iron Studios and released around the movie's release in 2004 for all the consoles at the time. This game is just a certified classic. I have so much nostalgia for this game. I would argue it's like maybe the best movie tie-in game of all time. It's one of my favorite games probably of all time. It is just an all-around great game. The game does reuse a number of asset and gameplay elements from Battle for Bikini Bottom. It was developed by the same team in a pretty short amount of time. Yes, it does use a lot of the stuff from Battle for Bikini Bottom, but I just don't even really care. Like, it's done in a new context, and it's just so much fun, even all these years later. The game follows the plot of the movie, where it's about SpongeBob and Patrick going to Shell City to get Neptune's crown. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Of course it would be, but I really do love the movie. This game follows the plot pretty decently well. They throw in a bunch of little extra things here because, you know, it's a game, but I think the plot's pretty great. The game really has endless references to the movie and SpongeBob as a whole. Like, I thought that every level had at least one joke that made me laugh, and I quite liked it. And the gameplay is a good old-fashioned 3D platformer. You play as either SpongeBob or Patrick depending on the level, and it is a lot more linear than Battle for Bikini Bottom. A lot of the time it is point A to B, there is some backtracking, and there is still, you know, the main collectible, the power stars of the game, the Goofy Goober tokens, but I'll just say it is a bit more linear than Battle for Bikini Bottom, and I think the level design, it's not as good as Battle for Bikini Bottom, but it still is pretty good. SpongeBob and Patrick have a number of different abilities they get throughout these levels to really mix up the gameplay. I think the platforming is solid enough. There is some enemy encounters. It's fine. It's pretty simple. And I think it's just a grand old time. I think the level design still is able to intrigue and engage you in much better ways than even Revenge of the Flying Dutchman does. There's other levels though where you aren't platforming, like where you're driving in the car. These are always great. And then there's also the slide levels. I've always really liked the slide levels in any 3D SpongeBob game, and I think the slides here are probably the best slides in like the whole series. They're also the most fleshed out, like they're entire levels here rather than a little segment, and these honestly still rock, and the music is great during this. In fact, speaking of the presentation, the game obviously looks very similar to Battle for Bikini Bottom, but it looks fine. The music though, the music is so freaking good in the SpongeBob movie game. It is unbelievable to me how good this music still is. Like, it is just fantastic. It is excellent, superb, banger after banger after banger, just amazing. We'd be here all day if I talked about how great it is, so I'm gonna just move on. Genuinely, I'd say every level is good in this game. There's no bad level. I clearly like some levels more than others, but I really do think all the levels are pretty solid in this game. There's even some boss fights, and the final boss is just epic. And I remember as a kid it was actually really challenging. Nowadays I kind of laugh, but as a kid it was really hard. I hope this game gets remade one day like Battle for Bikini Bottom, but I really doubt it. There might be like some licensing issues or something, and who knows. But it is still a fantastic game that I think should not be missed by anyone who likes 3D platformers or SpongeBob, because it's just such a great game still. Like, even all these years later, I'm still like, damn, the SpongeBob movie game just hits so good. But here we are, everyone, SpongeBob the Cosmic Shake, and you know, I am so excited to come here and tell you that this game is awesome. This is not only the best SpongeBob game in the last like 15 years, but this seriously is one of the best SpongeBob games ever. And another shout out to THQ Nordic for hooking me up with the review code, but seriously, this game is awesome, and I'm just going to say it. I think everybody who likes SpongeBob or 3D platformers should definitely head out and give this game a shot, because it really is actually a great game. It builds on top of Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, and it plays pretty similar to that game in a number of ways, but it does a few things to mix it up like the movie game did, and I think it just actually creates a great experience. And if you love SpongeBob, especially early SpongeBob, this game will have you absolutely popping off. This game is a SpongeBob fan's game. I have not seen so many references to classic SpongeBob in anything and for so long, and this game had me busting out laughing numerous times. This is one of like the funniest games I've ever played. The story's pretty simple. It's about SpongeBob and Patrick going to Glove World, and there they meet this mystical mermaid who's like a fortune teller, it seems, named Cassandra, and she sells them this jelly that apparently can ripple through time, and SpongeBob and Patrick just go absolutely nuts with it and make a bunch of wishes and ripples, and really they just cause all of Bikini Bottom to plunge into chaos, and then it's up to SpongeBob to save the town and his friends. You'll go through a bunch of different environments, bunch of different time periods, and you'll have to have an appropriate costume for each one, and so there's a number of references here, but no. The story's good, and the writing's good, and the fan service is good, but I'm here to tell you the gameplay is actually pretty good as well. It's a more than solid enough 3D platformer. You play exclusively as SpongeBob, however he does get a number of abilities throughout the game, and there are a couple other little gimmicks that get thrown in there, like riding the seahorse. But I think the movement, controls, and SpongeBob's abilities are all pretty solid in this game, and it's stuff you actually haven't seen before. They aren't just reusing old stuff, which is nice. And yeah, you really just go through these levels. They're pretty linear for the most part. It's not really a collectathon here. There are some collecting elements, but I wouldn't really say it's a collectathon. It's a mostly linear 3D platformer where you come across a number of platforming challenges and get into some enemy encounters. The actual enemy encounters are fine enough here. Every enemy has like a little strategy to beat them, and SpongeBob has a couple different moves you can attack them with. Most of the time I really just kind of spun and hit them with the spin over and over, but they all have little strategies here and there. But it's always great to see a modern game just have so much 3D platforming. I feel like not enough games really have 3D platforming anymore, and to see a game like this have so much, it's just really a breath of fresh air, honestly. And I thought the platforming was pretty good. The level design is actually pretty solid here. It's nothing, too complex or crazy, but I would say that it's pretty good. There's a lot of variety when it comes to the environments, how they look, and how you go through them. In this game, I'm going to just say it looks great. It is so colorful, and it has so much life to it, and I know that this is a bit of a budget title, but I really do think it actually looks pretty great and faithful to the show. I also think the game is pretty polished. I didn't have any glaring issues or glitches or bugs or the game crashing or anything like that. Outside of the game maybe freezing up for a couple seconds, it would always fix itself though. I didn't have like anything, and that's pretty nice to see such a small budget game not have a ton of technical issues. Including the hub world, there's 8 worlds in this game, and I think they're all actually pretty good. They've all got their own little objective, and they all serve a purpose in the story. But on top of the main mission for each one, there's actually a side objective for each level, and they want you to go back and find these collectibles hidden throughout. You can find these coins that allow you to unlock new costumes, which these costumes are great, by the way. They have so many amazing references. And the other collectible is usually some item that will help SpongeBob's friends in some way. These were alright. I mean, it feels like they low-key just kind of almost placed these new items down at random and told you to go find them as a way to like pad out any side objectives. I mean, it's not amazing, I'll say that, but it gives you a reason to go back and play these levels again, and you can actually explore these levels with your new abilities and get new things because you get the abilities, throughout the game. There's a little bit of backtracking here when it comes to that, but you never have to do any if you want to just play through the main game. And this game actually has a pretty decent length to it, taking me around, like 8 to 10 hours, which is more than I expected for a game like this. And if you want to get everything, you're probably looking at 10, 11, maybe even like 12 hours. But playing through this game really was just an absolute joy. It felt like a game from the 2000s in the best possible way. It was a fun throwback, and I felt like a kid again playing through this game. This feels really like the Battle for Bikini Bottom sequel we never got. Obviously there was the movie game, but that's a little different. This feels more like a direct sequel. And really, I just have not had a game instill so much childlike wonder for me in such a long time. This one really hit hard in the feels, and so I'm probably really biased here. I've probably got the recency bias too, but I just really enjoyed this game. This was one of my most hyped games of the year, like not even close, and I think it absolutely delivered, and it's just a really fun time. The game was clearly made by fans of SpongeBob, people who probably grew up watching SpongeBob also, and so they get it, and playing through this game, just again, it was laughing, it was tears of joy, it was just fantastic. I was so happy with it. I have no problem recommending the game to anybody, honestly. If you don't want to pay the full $40 for it, it's budget by the way, only $40, it'll probably be like $20 in a few months, and then I really can just say, absolutely go try it. And here we have Battle for Bikini Bottom. You already knew this was going to be the best SpongeBob game. Like, it's Battle for Bikini Bottom. People absolutely love this game for a reason. Originally developed by Heavy Iron Studios in 2003, it was remade by Purple Lamp in 2020. And I think this remake is honestly even better than that original game. They added more to it. The game looks great too. The story's pretty simple. It's about Plankton creating these robots to take over Bikini Bottom, but it malfunctions on him and they don't listen to him because he didn't flip the obey switch, and now they're just wreaking havoc on Bikini Bottom, and it's up to SpongeBob and friends to stop them. The game came out when SpongeBob was at his absolute best, and this game references a ton of episodes. This new remake also references a ton of episodes, even more than the original game. There are just plenty of references here, and this game is just very funny, and it's very faithful to old SpongeBob. If you like old SpongeBob, well, you've probably already played this game, but you will like all the references here. And then to go back to the presentation for a second, the original game had some parts where it looked a bit funky, but it generally looked pretty alright. This new remake, I think it looks great. It looks very faithful to the show. It's super colorful, and I like that it's on Unreal, and it looks nice, and again, it's just very nice. And the music, oh, it's just legit legendary. It just slaps so hard. It's so good. I have nothing but amazing things to say about the Battle for Bikini Bottom soundtrack. You know what? It's just so good. It's so good. The actual gameplay is pretty simple to understand. It's a solid 3D platformer where you're dropped into these big environments and you're tasked with just collecting these golden spatulas. You could play as SpongeBob, Patrick, or Sandy depending on the level. They all have their own abilities and obstacles, and along the way you'll do a bunch of platforming, you'll do some mini games, and you'll get into combat encounters. The combat is pretty simple in this game. Usually you just attack them once, maybe twice, and that's it. It's the platforming, exploration, and the mini games where things really get a little more complex. It's nothing too crazy. It's not, Banjo-Kazooie or Mario 64 levels, but it's more than, say, Revenge of the Flying Dutchman. It's a good in-between. There is a ton of levels here with tons of references to SpongeBob in these levels. In the original game, the only one I didn't really like too much was the Kelp Forest because it was so dark. This has been fixed in the remake, and so I can truly say every level is actually pretty good. Some better than others, obviously, but I still think that all the levels are good. They all have good design, and there's a decent amount of variety here. I think the game has a solid amount of exploration, and the game does reward you for exploring with either secrets or shortcuts or Patrick's socks, which you have to collect a bunch of to get a couple of the golden spatulas, the main collectible here. And this game, it doesn't do anything revolutionary. It doesn't do anything innovative either. It just is a really solid 3D platformer with SpongeBob with a good attention to detail, and it's clear that fans of the show made the game. The game has a pretty decent length to it. If you want to just play through the game normally, it'll probably take you anywhere from like 7 to 8 hours. But if you want to collect everything, you're looking at over 10 hours easy. And I always try to collect everything when I play this game because it's just such a blast. Like, I've never not had a great time with this game. It's always such a chill time, and I never find myself not smiling while playing it because I have not only a ton of nostalgia for this game, but I truly do think it is one of the best 3D platformers of all time. Again, it doesn't do anything all that crazy, and if you don't like SpongeBob, you'll probably think it's just alright, but for those of us who do like SpongeBob, those of us who do remember this game from back in the 2000s, you remember it was like the shit. I remember being crazy excited about it, playing it the first time. I remember all my friends were talking about it on the playground. I remember there were ads all over for it. It was a big deal when it came out. The remake even added some cut content and multiplayer. I mean, what else is there to say? Like, it's just a great game. It's not only one of the very best licensed games ever made, but it really is the best SpongeBob game ever made. And I just don't think that's ever going to be beaten at this point. This game is just legendary. It is goated. And yeah, it's just a great time, and I have no problem saying to absolutely go check it out. If you made it to this part of the video, you've probably already played the game, if not 100%ed it. So it's clear I like the game. I'd say this might be my most nostalgic game of all time. It's probably my favorite game from my childhood, and if I had to choose one game from my childhood to represent all of it, it'd probably be this game. I really do love it that much. It can pretty much do no harm, and call it the nostalgia bias, the foggy glasses, or whatever you want to call it, but I really do just love this game. Yeah, that's it for this video, I guess. If you made it to this part, comment bricks down below like what you used to build a house. Shout out to my one Patreon, you know who you are. Thank you so much. Hope everyone has a good one and they're always ready for the next day. So, see y'all later. Bye-bye.